The wind came off Blackwater Bay with the low growl of a living thing, tasting of salt and iron and smoke from cook fires. The hall on Dragonstone had been warmed with braziers, but the stone still held the sea's chill. The torches hissed and spat as if annoyed to be here. Daenerys stood beneath the dragon carvings, the tide breathing through the castle's lungs, and watched Jon Snow cross the rushes toward her with boots that made no sound. He had that northern stillness about him, the one that made talkers uneasy. His hair was tied back, his jaw rough with a day's growth, his eyes shadowed. Dragons were creatures of heat and noise and appetite, and Drogon roost somewhere above with his great heart beating like a forge. Jon stopped 3 paces away. Behind him, Grey Worm, Missandei absent forever like a place in a song where a verse had been torn out. Tyrion stood to one side with wine he wasn't drinking. "Your Grace," Jon said. Her name on his lips had changed since the truth. It wasn't less respectful. It wasn't more. It was different, heavier, like iron that had been quenched poorly and kept a memory of the flame. "I sent for you," she said. He nodded and waited. In the hall's echoes, in the weary drag of soldiers' feet on the stones outside, she could hear a city miles away pretending not to exist. King's Landing, where the bells would one day be rung or not, where Cersei Lannister slept with wildfire beneath her bed like wolves under the floorboards. "You told me once," Daenerys said, "that you bent the knee because you believed in me." "I did," Jon said. "I do." He was careful. All of him had become careful since Sam and Bran set truth loose like a white raven. Snow never spoke of himself if he could help it. Now he seemed unwilling to speak of anything that touched the two of them, as if every word were a blade that might cut their hands. "I have no family here," she said. "No counsel I trust, not enough to carry what comes." She looked at Tyrion without looking, the way one learned to watch a door. "I have lost a great deal. A queen must rule with more than loss." Tyrion bent his head, the wine in his cup making a soft ring as it touched the metal. "And you would have me do what?" Jon asked. Grey Worm's dark eyes shifted between them. His face wore that unbreakable discipline, but the line of his mouth had been a barbed wire since Missandei's head struck the stones. He would not forgive. Men who had been made into purpose did not know how. "Stand beside me," Daenerys said. "Bear the weight. Hand of the Queen." The words were simple. She'd said them to men before. Each had taken them as ladder rungs to some loft of himself. Jon only stared, stunned, as if she'd offered him a hearth in a winter with no wood. "Tyrion is hand," he said. "Tyrion is clever," she replied, letting the flame in her throat burn just enough to be seen. "Cleverness has brought me here. It has also cost me a dragon and my friend." The clever forget the shape of people's fear when they arrange lives as if they were stones on a Syvas board. Tyrion lifted his gaze to hers. He did not argue. He looked smaller than he once had, not in inches but in reach. The city ahead held his sister like a coin held behind the teeth. "I will not be your puppet," Jon said. "I would break the hand off any who tried to put strings through you," Daenerys said, and saw the shiver in him that might have been anger or might have been something else. "I do not want a puppet. I want a conscience with a sword arm, who knows what winter does to the living and hates it." Grey Worm's shoulders had shifted just enough to be noticed by a woman trained to notice. "Soldiers do not need a conscience," he said, his voice like a slab of stone dragged on stone. "Soldiers obey." "And who tells them what to obey?" Daenerys asked without turning her head. "A queen does, and a queen must not be empty when she speaks." They were all quiet then. The hall breathed and the sea turned, and somewhere above Drogon exhaled smoke in his sleep. Jon's eyes were the color of the north in late afternoon, a dark silver before the fall of snow. He knelt. "I told you I don't want it," he said into the rushes. "I don't want thrones. I don't want titles." "Then take one for me," she said, and when she set the pin on him, cold, heavy, the small black hand clenched like a promise. Her fingers brushed the fabric on his chest, and she felt how steadiness was something learned, like a language. Tyrion watched him rise and watched the pin. He drank then, a quick swallow, as if to tidy some inward room. "You'll find the chair less comfortable than it looks," Tyrion said, voice dry. "I've warmed it poorly." Jon looked at him and gave half a nod. The nod of a man who had held dying friends and told them they were not alone. "I'll return it to you when this is done." "Alive, please," Tyrion said. "I'm running short on parts one can do without." Daenerys dismissed them, gestured for Grey Worm to stay. They stood together in the smolder of the braziers and the long shadows of the stone dragon's ribs. He waited. "I will not be cheated of what was taken," he said. "The city must pay." "The city is not a single thing," she answered. "A city is 1,000 griefs stacked into walls and called a place. We will punish soldiers. We will take the throne. We will make a world where they cannot make girls kneel by throwing collars in the sand." He did not blink. "We will kill Lannisters. We will kill those who raise steel against us," she said. "We will not kill for the shape of a man's hair or for the color of a child's flag." He bowed with the military precision she had bought with freedom. He would follow. He would tear through any door she told him to break. He would not forgive the stone that had taken Missandei's blood. She would have to be stronger than his rage and her own. When she was alone, Daenerys climbed. The wind struck her hair loose and hipped her cloak so it snapped like a banner. Drogon hung on the crags above like a piece of night where the night should not be. He lifted his head when she came, pupils a dragon's coin, then exhaled smoke that smelled faintly of something old and strange. Ash of bones, ash of ships, ash of old gods. She pressed her brow to the scale above his eye and stayed there, the stone under her boots, the beast under her hands, the war under all of it like undertow. "We will take it," she whispered. "We will do it without becoming what they say I am." Drogon blinked his lid sideways, which was as close to an answer as a dragon gave. They sailed again at dawn, because dawn made men think of beginnings and not of endings. Jon wore the pin now. Soldiers saw it and stiffened. The Northmen, those who had followed him into dead snow and back out, looked at it as if someone had hung a chain around a wolf's neck. Davos watched with those eyes that missed little and judged less. "If I start to sound like a book, slap me," Jon told Davos under his breath as the boats rose and fell. Davos grinned. "I've a good slap in me yet, my Lord Hand." "Don't," Jon said, and the word hand looked foolish on his mouth. "You want a title that fits?" Davos shrugged. "Try this then. You're the man she listens to. That's the measure that matters." Tyrion kept to himself, speaking when asked, arranging movements of siege and fire as if arranging letters in a word he no longer trusted. Varys had become a silence that moved, sending whispers into folded hands. At night Jon found him by a rail with the sea unrolling and folding itself again like a parchment. The eunuch's face was a lantern gone dim. "She has made you hand," Varys said without turning. "Wise of her. I've no patience for games, Lord Varys. You'll need some." The spider tapped a finger on the wood. "I will speak plainly. Her grief is a furnace. You might be the iron that survives it." "You're already writing letters," Jon said, and Varys's hand stopped tapping. "You know what I am," Varys said. "You know why I do it. The realm. The realm is people who will burn if you put that word in front of their names too many times," Jon said. "Have your little birds. Have your ink. But if you try to break her with them, I'll break you first." There was a curious relief in the eunuch's eyes, like a man told the blade had come at last. "Good," Varys said. "Now I know what the hand is." They came up on King's Landing under a sky that had decided to be bright and untroubled, as if the world had nothing to say about the quarrels of those who rode it. The city lay like a beast in the sun, ribs and streets and the great rock skull of the red keep bitten out of the hill. The scorpions crouched like iron crabs along the walls, their stings glinting. The river stank. The bells hung silent in their towers like teeth with no mouths. Jon gathered commanders in a room that stank of salt and wet wool. Grey Worm took a place to his right without being asked. Tyrion's fingers worried one another like two old men arguing sotto voce. "We break the stings first," Jon said, tracing with a knife point. "Drogon's fast enough if the wind is friendly and the sun shows the crew's eyes to him. After that, the gates. Once their ships burn and their spears melt, they'll know what's coming. We leave lanes for civilians to run. I want Northmen and Unsullied in pairs down each lane, one to hold, one to warn." "Warn?" Grey Worm asked, as if the word were a foreign thing. "Before a man dies, he should have heard what he died for," Jon said. "Even if he doesn't believe it." Tyrion swallowed a remark. Davos gave an almost smile that looked like a prayer that had not dared become one. "And when the bells ring?" Tyrion said. Jon looked to Daenerys, who had come in without sound. She was dressed for the sky, leather and a gray that could be either storm or cloud. The light from the slit window lit her hair like the edge of a blade. "When the bells ring, they've yielded," Jon said. "We hold." Daenerys' eyes flickered to Grey Worm. She saw the muscle working in his jaw, the place where a word went to be bitten in half. She heard the memory in herself of a girl's body on a wall and a queen on a balcony being made to watch. The old part of her, the one named Fire and Blood by men who died long before she was born, stretched and breathed and wanted. "We hold," she said. The words were a chain around something wild. She watched Jon's face and saw the relief not show itself. They came at the city like a storm wearing a dragon's skin. The Scorpion crews squinted into the sun and cursed the heat, and then one looked up and all their curses stopped because the sky had acquired a mouth. Drogon fell. A blur, a weight, a roar that pushed the air away from itself. Iron flowers bloomed, then burned. The first ballista went up like a nail driven through tinder. The second shot and missed, the bolt skittering along the stone like a blind wasp. The third aimed and did not fire at all because the crew had died without moving, ash statues frozen in the act of fear. Daenerys rode with her thighs and lungs and rage. There was a part of riding that was surrender. Men thought dragons were mastered, but a dragon mastered a pilot the way the sea mastered a ship. She remembered Regal pierced, falling into steel blue water. She remembered chains and whips and dusty men who thought breaking was a skill. She remembered doors closed and doors opened by fire. She remembered Jon's hands on the pin when she set it on him. How he had gone still as if the iron in it had informed the iron in him of some kinship. Below, men died. This was the point of it. Some points arrived wrapped in silk. This one came with noise. The gates broke because all gates attacked from the sky break eventually. The Golden Company, proud and tidy and doomed, turned when the dragon came low and their neatness made them brief. Jon fought on. The ground as kings had done before thrones were invented under other names. He took horses where the alleys widened and his men followed without speech, because men who had followed him on the ice knew that the only way from a bad hour to a better one was straight through. Grey Worm cut his way to the mud gate and planted a banner there in a spray of Lannister red that was not cloth. He was almost smiling when he killed. A very small thing, a tightening at the corners of the mouth like a man doing a difficult task well. He looked up when Drogon's shadow went across him and did not duck. He had never learned to flinch. The bells were slow. The bells were stubborn. The bells were the city's throat learning how to plead. When they rang, at last, they rang clumsy, as if the ropes had been pulled by hands that did not often do it. The sound went over the city like a sheet being thrown across a body. Men stopped, knelt, dropped swords that sounded like coins. Jon lifted a hand. Grey Worm snapped out an order. Spears slanted from killing to holding. The Dothraki shifted like a river reassessing its banks. For a heartbeat, the city gathered breath to be a place that would live tomorrow. Drogon's wings beat slow and huge, a sound like a foundry's heart. Daenerys circled once. Her hair whipped her mouth. The Red Keep stood, intact, a refusal in stone. On its terrace, a small shape glittered. Cersei, a jewel held stubbornly in a clenched fist. Qyburn hovered beside like a parasite, thin and pale. The queen's face, at that distance, was a stain of yellow. The bells went on clanging like a child beating a pot. The part inside Daenerys that remembered slavers' whips said burn it. The part that had cradled a dying Dothraki child in a tent said not like this. The part that had learned nothing could stop a wheel, but destroying the wheel said fire is an answer that stays answered. The part that had watched Jon's eyes when he lifted the pin said, I told him hold. She felt Drogon waiting for what she wanted. She felt all the men waiting too below. 100,000 held breaths trying to hear in her silence what the shape of tomorrow would be. She banked, and Jon saw her descend. He put heels to his horse and rode across the churned square to where Grey Worm stood and lifted his spear for the throw he'd dreamed about since a pale woman's head bounced once and lay quiet. Grey Worm, Jon shouted. He put his horse between the commander and the street of surrendering men. The horse reared, and for a breath they were a silhouette cut against the raw sky. Spear and wolf, fire and memory. Stand down. That's an order. Grey Worm's face did not know what orders were anymore. He heard sounds. He knew which ones meant up and which ones meant down. He had learned that he obeyed the one who was strong. The bells battered the air. He looked at the pin on Jon's chest as if it were a small, ugly animal. They killed her, he said. They made you watch. They made all of us watch. They killed because they were told to, Jon said. Tell them to stop and they will. Tell our men to stop and they will. We will take her another way. There is no other way, Grey Worm breathed. They must feel it. Jon leaned forward on the saddle, as if to offer his throat and dare the world to cut it. They will feel it when she sits her throne and their children do not wear chains. He made the mistake of looking where Daenerys circled. Grey Worm saw it. Do not make her the thing she hates. Don't. Not you. The man formerly called a slave stared into the eyes of the man formerly called a bastard. He lowered his spear a finger width. Above, the dragon blew smoke, not flame, and the whole city waited inside the pocket made by a choice. Daenerys took Drogon higher until the keep was a stone pushed up out of a flattened earth. She could end it. She could end it so thoroughly that the word Lannister would take a century to learn to say itself again. She could make songs and silences both bow. And yet, she remembered a boy in a northern hall who had said he didn't want the throne with the same voice someone uses to say there's a child trapped under a wagon. She remembered kneeling in a filthy street in Meereen with a dying man's head in her hands while she promised him a city where no one would take his name. She remembered 100 small mercies that had cost her nothing and cost her everything. She remembered the monsters they had made of her before she had even had a chance to be a woman. She went down, not in a dive, not in fury. She landed by the gate like a thing agreeing to become smaller than it was. Dust rose. Men flinched because men flinch at gods touching dirt. Jon dismounted and came to her with his head bare, not bowing. She swung a leg over and slid down Drogon's shoulder until her boots touched ground that only a breath ago had been. For some of these men, a future they did not believe they'd see. They faced each other with thousands watching. The wind worried the edges of her cloak like a woman worrying a scab. You gave an order, she said. You gave it, he said back gently. I carried it. He was too honest to be a courtier. It was infuriating, and it was why she had tied the pin to him. She took a breath that tasted of old iron and wet stone and something floral from the market that had miraculously survived the morning. Bring me Qyburn, she said. Bring me the mountain. Bring me my enemy dressed in whatever dignity she thinks is armor. We will end this where everyone can see. Men ran. Orders unreeled. The city, which had been a beast cowering at her feet, raised itself into a strange new posture, half fear, half something like attention. The Lannister soldiers did not resist when the Unsullied, grim as a snowless winter, moved to take positions along the path up to the keep. The Red Keep's doors did not open at first. Then they did, because stone does not bother to be loyal when men with keys die. Why? Byrne came down with the look of someone whose god had cancelled an appointment. The mountain came as death came, in a shape that allowed witnesses. And Cersei arrived with her gown like poured sunlight and her face like a well-aimed knife. She took in the dragon, took in the wolf's bastard in a black pin, took in the men not killing who had come here to kill. There was a brief and wild flicker in her eyes. the kind a gambler has when a die lands on its edge. "So this is mercy," Cersei said, voice steady, finely made. "You let them live long enough to watch you dress for the throne." Daenerys stepped forward until she could have reached and put her hand around the other woman's throat. "This is justice," she said. "Justice would be you burning with your father's voice," Cersei said. "Justice would be my children saved from prophecy. Justice. Your justice is only a word that makes your hunger sound like a virtue," Daenerys said. And the city heard the words because the wind decided to lift them, because sometimes the world collaborates with a sentence. "Mine will be a law that says no child will starve while you feast. Mine will be a road that takes an old man to a healer and finds one. Mine will be a tax taken to keep peace and not to gild a bed." Cersei laughed, a small sharp thing. "You will learn. You will learn that men do not love the deliverer. They love what they imagine she is. When you disappoint them, they will serve the next liar with sweeter words. You will burn, or you will be forgotten." Daenerys felt the old rage prick the inside of her mouth like a spice. She nodded once. "That is possible," she said. "But first, you will be forgotten." They set the platform by the gate because the gate had seen kings pass and rats pass, and it had not learned the difference. It would know now. Qyburn stammered something about laws and rights until Grey Worm put a hand on his shoulder and squeezed, and Qyburn discovered silence. The mountain stood like a cliff that had learned to stand upright and found it enjoyed the view. "You can kill me," Cersei said, and her voice almost broke on the last word and then did not. "You can kill me and there will be another. There is always another." "There will be," Daenerys said. "I do not intend to be the last enemy of evil. I intend to do good while I can." She gestured. The headsman stepped forward, the kind that always exists in every city. Someone with a steady arm and a life no song will build a stair for. Cersei did not kneel. Jon stood with his hands open at his sides, as if ready to catch something that would fall. Tyrion arrived breathless, a late penitent to a church he had mocked. "Please," he said to Daenerys, "let her rot. Let time make a ruin of her. Do not make a shrine of her death." Daenerys looked at him. Her grief had left little patience for half measures that became whole sorrows later. But she remembered the chain around the wild thing inside her when the bells had rung. She heard it again. "Very well," she said. "A cell, a trial in the sight of those she starved." Cersei's mouth betrayed a tremor of disbelief that she buried with practice. The mountain moved when Qyburn whispered, as if death still needed a handler. They led her away not like a queen, not like a prisoner, but like something in between that made the crowd murmur in confusion, in hunger, in the first sips of a new kind of drink. The day grew tired. The bells fell quiet because even relief must rest. Fires smoldered, controlled, watched with buckets and hands and a dragon's eye. Jon moved through the lanes, setting men to water lines, to lifting toppled carts, to breaking the locks on cellars where women and old men had hidden because they didn't yet trust the math of mercy. Children stared from doorways. One of them touched Jon's cloak with a fingertip and then withdrew it as if he had tested the heat of something dangerous and been surprised at how human warm it was. That night, they set their tents under a sky soft with ash. Daenerys did not sleep. She stood outside her pavilion with Drogon a black hill behind her and watched torches move like errant stars through the dark. Jon came when the moon had found a crack in the clouds and spilled itself through it. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she answered. He gestured toward the city. "Tomorrow they'll wake and be frightened because they are still alive. They'll look for rules to live by." She nodded. "We will give them rules." He hesitated. He was a careful man. She had thought him a blunt instrument and learned he was a blunt instrument wrapped in cloth. "Sansa will not trust you," he said. "The North has a long memory for fire." "I will not ask the North to forget," Daenerys said. "Only to judge by what I do next. What you did today will be told 100 different ways by sundown tomorrow," Jon said. "Some will say you held. Some will say you were too weak to do what needed doing." She stepped close. His face, lit by a torch some soldier forgot to put out, looked younger than it had all day. If I wanted to be called strong, she said, I would have burned them. I want to build. It is slower. He looked past her to Drogon. The dragon lifted his head at the exact moment, as if he had been waiting for his cue. It's not that I don't trust you, Jon said. It's that I know what war makes of all of us. Then be my war against that, she said, and before he could find some Stark-shaped word to answer, she lifted a hand and rested it on the pin she'd given him. Stay near. He didn't move away. He nodded. The nod felt like a small oath. In the morning, they brought Cersei to the September's ruins because there was a mercy in that, or perhaps a cruelty. It was hard to tell, and Daenerys was beginning to learn that in rule, mercy and cruelty were twins that slept in the same cradle. Half the city attended because people attend any spectacle that promises to make someone else's fate clear. Tyrion stood with his face clean-shaven, which made him look younger and more tired. They charged Cersei with crimes so numerous the list had to pause for water. She smirked, then smiled, then grew bored, then angry, then fearful, the way a gambler's face goes through seasons while the dice rattle. When the sentence came, imprisonment until a council of lords could be seated to pass judgment, she laughed again, but there was a crack in it. You think you can hold me? She said. You think I don't have a man somewhere buying a door with my coin at this very moment? Perhaps, Daenerys said, but I have a dragon. That afternoon, Jon found Grey Worm by the river, washing blood from a blade that had been cleaned 3 times already. The commander's hands worked the cloth like hands working grief that had no words in this language. Missandei would have liked what you did, Jon said. Grey Worm did not look up. It does not bring her back. No, Jon said. Nothing does. Men think revenge travels in a straight line and arrives with what you lost in a bag over its shoulder. It never does. Grey Worm's hands stopped. He stood and faced Jon. I obey the queen, he said. There was a challenge there, but also a surrender. I obey you while you are her hand. Obey her, Jon said. Question me. The world will be safer that way. Grey Worm blinked in that slow, deliberate way of a man discovering new instructions for an old machine. You are not what I expected. I keep not being, Jon said. He offered a forearm. Grey Worm hesitated, then gripped it, their scars meeting in a place that had learned to say more than men knew how. By evening, the city had begun the awkward work of turning war into chores. The smell of stewing bones came from 100 corners. The wine cellars were out, because wine cellars always are when men need to tell themselves they will live. Davos traded 2 loaves for a sack of nails because there was a door in a camp that did not like to stay shut. Varys vanished in the way shadows do at noon and were not seen that night. Tyrion brought 2 cups and a flagon to Daenerys' pavilion and stood outside until she invited him in. You could have burned it, he said, pouring for her and not himself. I could have, she said. You didn't, he said. I am trying to be the kind of man who does not make everything about himself, but allow me this. Thank you for not proving me a fool, or more of one. You are not my hand anymore, she said. You are still my counselor, if you would have it. He stared into his cup as if counsel might be hiding there. I would, he said, if you will forgive me for being me. Advise me as if I might disagree, she said. I have men to tell me I am right. He laughed then, briefly, cleanly. Your Grace, he said, and drank. The days after were a collage of small acts, because victory is a mosaic made out of chores. They opened granaries with keys pried off dead belts. They hanged 3 looters in the square where the Golden Company's neatness had ended, because the city had to learn where its new boundaries were drawn. Jon held the ladder for the headsman on the 3rd because the man had a limp, and when citizens saw the hand do such a thing, the story went ahead of him down alleys he did not walk. Envoys came out of the Reach and the Stormlands like birds that had been sheltered too long and were not quite sure how to fly. Some begged, some threatened, some did both in one sentence with commendable efficiency. Daenerys answered them with promises she would have to build later. Jon watched her currency be trust and knew how quickly it could spend itself in a dear market. At night, there were moments. Once, she laughed at something Davos said. something very small about onions and kings, and it sounded like a girl's laugh in a room that had forgotten girls existed. Once, John told her a story about a man at Castle Black who had taught mice to come to his hand with crumbs, and then cried when a hawk took one and didn't know who he was angry at. The hawk for being a hawk, or himself for teaching the mouse that hands were safe. Daenerys did not answer, but later she went to Drogon alone and laid her cheek against a scale until it dented her skin, and thought about hunger and training, and what kind of queen would teach a city to put its face near her hand. When the first snows came in the north, they came here as a rumor borne by ravens. Winterfell had not burned. Sansa had held. The grain had been good, for a northern definition of good. The raven had a small strip tied to its leg. Arya's cramped hand. Alive. Coming south. Daenerys read the word 3 times as if a spell might be hidden in it, and then went to find Jon, who said nothing and smiled the smallest smile that looked like a knife sheathed. On the 7th day after the bells, Varys attempted to run. He had letters on him, sure as a priest has prayers. He had a look of a man relieved to be finally caught. Jon brought him in himself. They stood before Daenerys with the lantern swinging and the night saying yes to every echo. "You would have done this even if today had burned," she said. "I would," Varys said. "I would have done it faster." "You pledged yourself to the realm," she said. "Always," he said. "I will not apologize for loving an abstraction that in the end is a face I do not know yet, in a house not yet built." She thought of the house she intended to build. She thought of the faces in it. "The realm is not a god," she said. "It cannot absolve you." "No," he agreed, "but perhaps you can." She could have burned him. The part of the story where the queen burned the spider had always felt inevitable, like the rise and fall of a breathing chest. She did not. She exiled him. She sent him on a ship with no banners and a purse with no mark, and she told him not to return. It was worse, in a way, to live in a world he had not managed to shape. He bowed, a small bow that was deeply honest, and was gone. It did not make every man love her. Some hated her more for not delivering the romance of cruelty. Some feared that mercy always concealed a trap. It made enough of them watch, though. It made enough of them look long enough to see what she would do next. In time, weeks and then months, because the work of power is measured in those and not in minutes. Daenerys Targaryen sat the Iron Throne because kings had taught the world to find comfort in certain symbols, and she was not yet strong enough to teach them new ones. The sword iron was cold and ordinary under the skin, like most legends. Jon stood at the foot of the steps with the pin dark on his chest and a tired hope on his mouth. She spoke, not only to lords but to bakers and to boys who had learned early the angles of alleys. She spoke of tithes and of widows and of the cost of rebuilding a gate versus the cost of rebuilding a promise broken. She spoke without poetry because poetry had made too many men eat air while the poets dined. She promised auditable coin and laws written in letters that a market girl could learn in a winter and a spring. She promised the Dothraki grass to run on and to pay them 2 oxen for every oath she asked them to make in a city where the horizon lived in the mouth of streets. Some days she wept, alone, for the things she hadn't done and the things she had. Some days she burned warehouses where slavers had thought they could wait out the weather. Some days she sat with a girl outside a bakery and watched loaves rise and asked questions about flour because a queen must understand the materials of miracles. Once, when the sun came slant through the windows and turned dust into little kingdoms in the air, Jon said, "You chose." She looked at him. "I chose again, and I will have to keep choosing or the first choice will go rotten." He nodded. He was careful as ever and fierce as ever. The combination had begun to make a shape the city could trust. "I'll keep you to it," he said. She smiled, small and not for anyone watching. "Good," she said. "That is what a hand is for." Outside, the bells rang the hour. Men and women stopped and listened because bells always had meant fear in this place. Then they went back to work when nothing burned. It would take a long time for the sound to learn a new meaning. Long was fine. Long was what the living had. The ravens learned the new purchase first. They came and went from the red keep with the tired boldness of birds that had seen too much rope and too many arrows to be moved by a queen's flag. Daenerys watched them sometimes in the mornings from the balcony above the hall where the small council had once lied to one another. Now the table below was a plank set over trestles, and the council were men and women who had dirt under their nails and a dragon outside the window. It was an improvement. Jon rose early, not because thrones required it, but because he always had. He came up from the yard where he'd been with the men, correcting a shield angle, steadying a green boy's hands when nerves made them tremble. When the boy looked up and remembered whose hands those were, the tremor became awe, which wasn't useful either. Jon said nothing about it. He passed the boy to an older sergeant with a nod and wiped sweat from his brow before the son had done enough work to earn it. "You greet the day as if it might apologize," Daenerys said when he joined her. The sea was a sheet hammered flat. Black gulls scribbled it with their voices. "Sometimes it does," he said. "Mostly it does not." She leaned on the stone. From here, with the city spread below like a board with pieces waiting to be chosen, it was easier to imagine the promises she'd made becoming laws, then habits, then stories that children would think were always true. Easier, too, to imagine all the ways those promises could be broken by hunger, by weather, by one man's pride. "Ravens from Winterfell," Jon said, touching the pouch at his belt. "One from Sansa, one from the maester in the usual hand. Arya writes like a girl racing a horse. She means to jump over the moon. She is near, in the Riverlands," he said, "with a company of men who think her a rumor dressed in leather. She'll be here in a fortnight if her horse doesn't throw her for insulting it. And Sansa?" He passed the scroll to her. Sansa's hand was winter clean, no flourishes, no spills. The words moved like a dancer stepping exactly where she intended. "To the Queen in King's Landing. The North remembers the fire that saved us and the fire that scarred us. We will judge not by tales, but by the grain that reaches our barns and the justice that reaches our widows. I will come when the roads are safe enough that my presence will not steal bread and sleep from those who carry me. Sansa Stark, Lady of Winterfell." Daenerys read it twice. Jon watched her read it the way a man watches a blade being weighed. "She will ask for the North," Daenerys said. "She will," Jon said. "She will also listen to what is asked of her." "You know your sister better than I do," Daenerys said. "I know women like her. They risk little and keep much. They are not cruel. They are not kind. They are winter in a room where you had hoped for spring." His mouth curved, a rare warmth. "You two will get on, then." "I mean to," she said. "For the sake of the world we're borrowing." Below, the bells marked a new hour. The sound went out over the roofs and the mended gates and the markets where men were, even now, learning the new weight of coin that had the three-headed dragon on one side and a sheaf of barley on the other. The bell's voice returned thinner, gentled by distance, and did not begin a fire. By mid-morning, the hall filled with things a queen had to sort. Broken contracts, broken doors, broken men. A drover from the Rose Road held his cap in both hands while he explained how a Lannister officer had taken 6 oxen the wee. Eck before the bells, and how the man now wore black, called himself a king's man, and refused to pay because he had changed the color of his coat. Daenerys asked the man's name. She sent for him, when he swaggered and sweating under arms not yet fully cleaned of old blood. She had him return the oxen at once, and then set him to 2 days with a bucket brigade. He fumed. He obeyed. The drover left hugging his cap like a child. Tyrion stood to her left again, not with a pin but with a ledger. He had come back to numbers as a sailor returns to a familiar wind. When men spoke, he wrote. When Daenerys judged, he made the judgment become a sum. Jon stood to her right and did not speak unless the matter stank of iron or snow. They were teaching the hall the shape of a government. Grey Worm's place was near the doors. He watched everything as if it might try to run. When petitioners raised their voices, his hand moved to his spear by a finger's width. When Daenerys raised hers, the hand stayed. He was learning that the world could be made to stop in more ways than one. At noon, a courier arrived from the cells with a note about the woman in the deepest room. Cersei had not eaten. She had laughed at the jailer and counted spiders. She had asked for her wine with a polite smile like a knife held under a sleeve. Daenerys went down. The steps smelled of old decisions. The lanterns painted the walls with shadows that resembled men who had failed. In the last cell, Cersei sat on the straw with her hair dragging the color from her face. She looked up when the door opened and made a small motion that used to bring men to her feet. "You should eat," Daenerys said. "You should have burned me," Cersei answered. "Perhaps," Daenerys said, "but I want your trial. I want the lords who saw you as a solution to see you as a problem solved by law." Cersei tilted her head. "Lords will come. They will sit at your table and nod as if they are not counting which direction the coin flows in. They will make of your mercy a story in which you are weak and of your strength a story in which you are mad. They will leave you alone when you need them and cling to you when you want them to drown. They are like barnacles with banners. Then I will scrape them from the hull," Daenerys said. "There is more sea than ship." Cersei laughed and coughed, a sound like chalk. "Beware the sea," she said. "It does not love queens either." Daenerys left her with bread and a bowl of stew and a guard who had orders to change every 4 hours so no one man would learn too much of her breath and her habits. On the way up, she paused at the level where the air learned to be cooler again, where rats believed themselves alone, and leaned her head against the wall. She saw Regal falling in the mind's eye and wondered if she could have made the choice she had made at the bells without that fall. She did not think so. Mercy is often born of the shape of the wound. Arya arrived with the rain. She came into the court like weather, spattered with the south's thin mud and smiling from the side of her mouth. The guards had not decided whether to bow and so did an awkward half-dip that would have made a younger Arya roll her eyes. The older one nodded to them with the generosity of a girl who had once stolen their helmets. Jon met her in the yard before anyone else could put their words on her, and she struck him on the shoulder with her forearm hard enough to hurt. "Brother," she said. He held her while the rain tried to make them slip. When she pulled back, her eyes were counting exits without thinking. He saw the habit and didn't remark on it. "You look like you've been eating," he said. "I stole from fat men who wanted to tell me jokes," she said. "I didn't laugh. It soured their wine." She would not let him announce her. She would not let a herald learn her name. She slid into the hall while a fishmonger argued with a miller and came to stand near the columns with her arms folded, taking the measure of the shapes of men who thought themselves bigger than rooms. When Daenerys saw her, she did not call her forward. She simply nodded, an acknowledgement of a blade that had chosen not to cut. Arya's eyes narrowed a fraction, then relaxed. They understood each other's insistence. Later, over a joint of beef that had been stretched with roots and bread to feed too many, Arya leaned on the table and spoke low. "I killed the Night King," she said. "That should satisfy any gods you serve. Now I want the world to be boring for a month." "It won't be," Daenerys said. "It will be a patient enemy with a long spine." Arya grinned. "Good. I like enemies who think they are patient. They miss knives." Sansa came with a column of riders 2 days after the clouds had cleared, because she would not arrive unseen. She wanted the city to look up and understand that the North was not a rumor. She rode with her chin up and the banners low, winter's colors made clean by the southern sun. The crowd in the streets watched with mouths chapped by salt and ash. Some spat, some bowed. Many only stared with the exhaustion that fails to be opinion because opinion requires energy. In the hall, the sisters stood together before the queen. It was the first time Daenerys had seen the 3 of them in one place with none of them bleeding. She let the moment be what it was, a picture the realm would learn to carry. "Sansa," Jon said. The word carried history like a body. "Jon," Sansa said, and then, more formally, "Your Grace." Daenerys descended the step that made her taller than other people for no honest reason and stood where Sansa did not have to look up. "Lady of Winterfell," she said. "Welcome." "I have not sworn," Sansa said. There was the ghost of a smile on her mouth. "I have, however, traveled far enough to demand tea." They took it in a small chamber where maps had the graciousness to keep silent. The tea was bitter. The honey was poor. They drank it without complaint. Tyrion sat in the corner with his cup and the attentiveness of a man who has learned that many wars are declared over food. "You spared the city," Sansa said to Daenerys after the quiet had proved itself strong enough to carry words. "That will be told in a dozen versions. None will be the one where you decided not to do what you wanted." "I did what I wanted," Daenerys said. "I wanted to rule, not to punish stone for being arranged into houses." Sansa inclined her head. "Then we are already closer than rumor said. I came to say this. The North will not kneel. It will stand beside. The snow does not kneel to the rain. They meet, and each changes the other." Daenerys looked to Jon because she wanted him in the story of this agreement. He said nothing, which is sometimes the best assistance a man can render. "An alliance," Daenerys said, "not a submission. A vow," Sansa said, "not a bend." "What will the vow cost?" Daenerys asked. "Grain when Southron fields fail," Sansa said. "Men when dead things rise again, not if. Iron when ships are needed. Seats at your council when the decisions bind us. The right to cut off any southern lord's hand if it reaches too far north under cover of your name." "Done," Daenerys said, and watched Sansa's eyes. Saw the surprise that the word had come so easy. "And for me, roads maintained north of the neck. Salt for your winters. A standing promise that no tax will be laid on the north that has not been negotiated in writing and signed by both of us. And if any man down here cries treason at the word independence, I will let the bells teach him the meaning of surrender." Sansa smiled fully then. It transformed her face into the girl who had once believed in songs and in the shape of a prince's jaw. "We may learn to be friends," she said. "We may learn to be queens," Daenerys said. "Both are harder than they look." Tyrion drank to that, and the tea stopped being so bitter for a breath. The trial required a scaffolding of ceremony hung over a scaffolding of fear. Lords came because they could smell history like hounds scenting meat. The Prince of Dorne arrived with a court that made color look like a religion. Yara Greyjoy came with a ship's swagger and hands that would not be still. Gendry Baratheon came because someone needed to sit in a chair with antlers on it and he had the right chin. Brienne arrived with her armor polished and her eyes raw from the road, traveling with a small party from the north bearing letters and vows. Samwell Tarly came because Jon had written that he would be needed, and Sam had never in his life not come when asked. They met in the throne room because the sight of the iron mattered to men who had taught their bones to bend around the idea of it. The swords in the walls caught the torch's light and threw it back unkindly. Cersei was brought up with shackles at wrist and ankle, the kind that add a sound to every step that says you are no longer a person, you are a procession. Qyburn was pale and calm. The mountain stood behind like a castle, remembering it was a man. Jaime Lannister was not there. Brienne found Tyrion before the doors opened. "Jaime," she said, and stopped, because names are heavy and sometimes one syllable is as much as a body can lift. "He was taken," Tyrion said quietly. "Caught by men loyal to no one, near the mud gate. He's in a cell 2 levels above your queen. He asked for you." Brienne's face did a complex thing. It cracked and held itself together in the same motion. "And you didn't tell me. I had hoped," Tyrion said, looking for courage in the empty palm of his hand, "to spare you whatever it is I am sparing you. Forgive me, or don't. I will manage." She left him standing with his misplaced gallantry and went down into the dark that always smells of yesterday. Jaime sat on a stool with his back against the wall and his golden hand in his lap like an animal that had fallen asleep. When Brienne entered, he looked up and his mouth tried to be what it had learned long ago, handsome and curved and careless. It failed. The care had been beaten out of the curve. "Lady Brienne," he said. "Sir Jaime," she returned. The old honorific came out of her like a story she wanted to tell again and didn't trust. He lifted the hand. "I have been better. You have been worse," she said. He laughed. I have been alive while worse happened to me than this." She stood inside the cell without moving, and then she was moving 2 steps, 3, and her hand was on his cheek and then away again because touch is a country with its own border guards. "I tried to go to her," he said, "to die there, like a story. I am sorry. For that. For other things I have not much coin to pay for. You are a fool, Brienne said. But you are not the same fool. That is something. Jaime looked at the straw. What will your queen do? She will not burn the city, Brienne said. She will do something harder. My sister does not do hard things, he said softly. Only cruel ones. She will hate your queen more for the absence of fire than for its presence. Brienne lowered herself to the stool across from him. I came to say this, she said, and her voice surprised her with the steadiness like a bridge held by hidden stones. Whatever judgment they pass on Cersei is not yours. You do not burn or hang for her. Do not volunteer to be ash. He looked up, and the thing in his eyes that had never learned to be humble tried on the shape of humility and found it fit better than he had feared. In the hall, the trial uncoiled. Charges read like a litany. Names of the dead rolled out and made a mountain range between the accused and the heir. Cersei stood with her chin high, with a dress plain enough to pass for penitent, with a smile that had killed better men than these. When asked to answer, she told the room a story in which she was the last keeper of order and every act had been a kindness. Misunderstood. It was a good story. It had fed half the city for a decade. It did not feed the dragon perched on the keep, nor the girl with the knife near the pillar, nor the woman from Noth standing just inside the doorway, silent and wearing a shawl the color of ripe limes. Daenerys listened. Jon watched the men listening. He had learned that justice is not only the judgment but the theater that surrounds it. He saw faces go through the motions of persuasion and arrive at the place where they had always intended to end. He saw faces change. Sam spoke, not with a roar but with an insistence that people had to lean toward to hear, and thus found themselves leaning toward gentleness. We will inherit our customs from what we do here, he said. Not our words, not our banners. The next tyrant will not be discouraged if we make a tidy cruelty today. A lord from the Stormlands called out that the Queen's mercy would breed rebellion by example. Davos answered that men always learn faster from power than mercy, and that if rebellion came it would be because bellies growled and not because ropes were spared. Yara observed, cheerfully, that mercy was a tax you paid to the drowned god early, so he did not collect with interest later. The Prince of Dorne said nothing and thought deeply. This was an improvement over most princes. When the votes were taken, publicly because secret judgments rot faster, the tally was this. Cersei to be confined for a year and a day to a tower kept by 3 houses in rotation. Her trial to resume with a jury refreshed by time and by the sight of a city that did not burn in her absence. Qyburn to be dismissed from practice and banished across the narrow sea with the warning that if he returned every leech in King's Landing would be made to drink his blood to repay his debts to them. The mountain to be unhelmed and shown to the room. They did it there because a city should not let its monsters continue to be myths. The helm came away with a reluctance that felt like blasphemy. The face beneath was ruin given shape, human materials arranged where a man had been and was no longer. A woman in the 4th rank cried out and put both hands to her mouth and would not remove them. Daenerys looked without flinching. Jon did not look away, but his jaw went hard enough to hurt. Qyburn paled to the bitter white of a spent candle and clutched at his papers as if they were talismans. They put the helm back on and led the mountain away because no one wanted the nightmare to feel naked. After, when the crowd drained itself into the streets and the lords turned to their minor intrigues as a horse turns to hay after a charge, Daenerys stayed seated. The throne did not become more comfortable with long use. Jon remained at the foot of the stairs. Tyrion busied himself with the ledgers as if numbers would put the world back into lines. Grey Worm stood at the door and did not move until the hall was nearly empty. Then he came forward and stood very straight and said, in the voice he used when he was telling himself how to be a person and not a blade, I would ask leave to send men to Noth. Daenerys looked up. The word was a small green thing in the room. To Noth, she said. To guard, he said. Not to stay long. To see what the island is without slavers in its trees. To make it so. She saw Missandei's mouth when it smiled. She saw the way her hand had once lingered on Grey Worm's forearm, as if there was a language there they had both begun to learn too late. How many? 100, he said. 200. Men who know they will not touch a woman there. Men who have learned that their hands are for making as well as breaking. Take 300, she said. And ships. And a letter from me that says any arm that reaches into Noth will be cut at the shoulder. He swallowed, and the movement was as revealing as a sob in another man. Thank you, he said. Your Grace. You will come back, she said. I will, he said, and believed it, which was as close as life ever lets men come to certainty. When they were alone, John went up 2 steps and stopped, because some distances must remain even when doors have been taken off their hinges. You gave up a hostage, he said. The city will say you are soft. The hills will say you are just. I cannot feed both mouths at once, Daenerys said, her voice small in the big room. I will let the hills speak for me, and you. He unfastened the pin and held it in his hand, weighing it as if it were a stone he intended to throw. If the day comes when the hills are wrong, he said, you will have to be strong enough not to care. She looked at the hand, the small clenched black shape. Be strong with me, she said. I am, he said. I will be, even when I am the obstacle you don't want. At the bells, she said, and it laid along the floor between them like a blade. You were. I was, he said. You thanked me later with your eyes, though you didn't much like it. She smiled then, tired, the smile of a woman who has carried water up too many steps and is proud of the ache. I don't like it now, she said. I am grateful anyway. The work went on. It was the kind that sings if you let it, the kind that turns men into their uses. They mapped where wells had turned foul and sent boys with spades and old men with the memories of what lay buried to clean and shore. They set up a court not in the Red Keep but in a market twice a week, where grievances were taken before a baker, a blacksmith, and a weaver, the 3 to change each month, so that justice had the taste of bread, iron, and thread. They took down 3 scorpions that had not yet been melted and sent the wood to the carpenter's yard and the iron to the smithy and the memories to the drink. They paid the Dothraki to ride patrols not into the city but around it. They made the wild horizon serve the walls, and the riders learned the names of hills and swore at them with tend. Earnest. Letters went to the Vale and the Riverlands and returned opening new doors in other halls. Jon Royce sent a promise of or. Lyanna Mormont's uncle sent a scrawl of approval that smelled of smoke. Edmure Tully sent apologies for having been useless for a time and a pledge to make himself tedious in council to make up for it. The Hightowers wrote something as polished as their lamps and promised scholars who would sort the broken records into piles that could be understood. Gendry came to court with his hair combed hard and his hands still stained. He looked like a good chair put in a ridiculous room. When Daenerys called him Lord of Storm's End, he went red, and when she asked him what he needed first, he said, a dry roof and a man with a book who can teach me to read faster. He and Arya met in a corridor without witnesses. They looked at each other and everything they might have said arrived and left without landing. She put a hand on his shoulder. He lifted it and kissed 2 of her knuckles. Not as a man kisses a lady's hand, but as a smith kisses a tool that has served him well. She left him there with his mouth shaped around a word. He did not say and went to the yard to throw knives until her arm obeyed again. Jaime's trial was smaller and crueler because it was about a single life. He stood without chains because Brienne had said chains would make him lie. He told his story without charm. He did not ask forgiveness because he had buried the part of himself that bartered for it. When the matter of the oath to Catelyn Stark rose like a stone underfoot, Brienne spoke. He kept it, she said, in the only ways he could. He kept it badly. He kept it. It was enough. The sentence was to live and serve, which frightened him more than rope. He took the white cloak again, stood guard outside the room with the Iron Throne, and felt the weight of sleepless nights pull at him in ways rope never had. Sansa and Daenerys discovered that they could argue like queens and end like sisters, with bruised pride and a better plan. Sansa wanted the North's roads garrisoned by Northerners only. Daenerys wanted mixed patrols to teach men that allegiance could be shared like a river that waters 2 fields. They fought in clipped phrases and long silences. Jon listened. Tyrion nudged a ledger. In the end, they wrote it. Mixed patrols in summer and autumn when the roads carry grain. Northern patrols alone in winter when no one from the south knows the difference between a drift and a grave. There were plots, the city cannot breathe without them. One involved a cask of Dornish red and a pearl-handled knife. It foundered because Arya took a liking to the merchant who was supposed to procure the cask and followed him for a day through the fish market purely to learn how he shouted without moving his mouth. Another involved a septon who had learned to twist mercy into a whip. He was dragged into the square by women who had listened to sermons too long and given a broom and a week's worth of floors. Varys's letters were found here and there like old shed skins. They said much and little. None were murderous. All were treacherous. Daenerys kept 2. She burned the rest, not with dragonfire but with a candle, because small flames do the work just as well and do not teach the wrong lesson. A ship brought the Nathi woman who had stood in the doorway during the trial. She came to Daenerys in a dress the color of a day at home after the rain, and when she bowed the braid at her temple swung like a pendulum keeping a god's time. "My name is Aya," she said. "I am sister to Missandei. I came to see the place that took her voice." Daenerys stepped down from the platform and took Aya's hands. "I took it back for her," she said, "and kept it for myself." "She loved you," Aya said. "She loved your idea as if it were an island." They sat together and ate sweet fruit that had traveled too far and lost some courage on the way. Aya told stories of Noth. Butterflies with wings like stained glass, rivers that sounded like women singing, the night insects that lit themselves and went out on a whim. Grey Worm came and stood in the doorway like a boy frightened to ask for bread. When Aya looked up, she smiled, and the shore appeared on his face for the first time in a long while. "Come," she said, "guard us. Do not stay if you cannot breathe. But come." "I will come," he said, and his voice made of the promise a thing that could be leaned on. The winter that came south was not the one that had tried to end the world. It arrived as a stern ant, unamused, exacting. Frost appeared on stones that had only ever known salt. Men who had never owned a cloak bought one and learned how to throw it over their shoulders without angering the wind. The city drew in. Fires made orange holes in the dark corners of alleys. Work moved indoors. Conspiracies did too and thinned, because corners are not as fertile as fields. It was on one of those cold mornings that Bran Stark arrived, carried by a litter and attended by a quiet that men did not put there. He came because Sansa had written that he should and because ravens had told him things people did not. They brought him up through the yards with their practiced dummies and their new fence rails and their old blood and into the hall where the columns had learned to like the sound of law. He looked at Daenerys with eyes that had lost interest in being human and found interest in being true. "Your Grace," he said. "Lord of Winterfell?" she answered with a look to Sansa. "Who can tell?" Sansa murmured dry. "He is a tree that learned to speak." Bran said, "The past is not a prophecy. It is a warning." "Of what?" Daenerys asked. "Of wheels," he said softly. "Of how men love them because they turn and give the illusion of motion. Break them, build roads." It made her laugh. It was a relief the way a cough sometimes is. "I am learning to prefer roads," she said. "They take lunch. They arrive where you intended." Bran turned his head toward Jon. The room went quieter because rooms do that around certain men when certain boys look at them a certain way. "You did as you must," he said. Jon's jaw worked. "I keep doing it," he said, and did not say what doing it had cost him in private places he visited mostly at night. Bran stayed a week. He spoke rarely. When he did, it was to point at something small and say, "That cracks." So men went and propped it. He stood one evening beneath the rebuilt bell and put his hand to the cold metal and smiled like a boy who has discovered a knot in a joke. Then he left, and the city exhaled. Spring crept back. It did not arrive as a miracle. It arrived as work that stopped hurting when you stood up after doing it. The first bunches of green on the trees in the square were crude and obscene. Then they were leaves, and no one remembered their awkwardness. The rivers uncoiled. Barges brought sacks that thumped like hearts. Children climbed where they had been forbidden to and were scolded lovingly because the men who scolded them were not carrying bodies now. Cersei's year and a day came due. The tower had not broken her so much as taught her what edges are like when you lean against them every night. They brought her out blinking into the light. She had made a religion of plainness. Her hair was gray at the temples in a way that would have terrified a younger Cersei. She walked without falter. She did not ask for water. The hall filled, slower than the first time, with more men who had come to make sure the last chapter matched the first. The jury was new. The stories were not. The charge sheet had grown leaner. Some matters had been settled by life. When asked what she had learned, Cersei said, "That mercy is a breed of cruelty proud of its manners." When asked if she regretted, she said, "I regret that other people think regret is meaningful." When asked what she would do if released, she smiled and wearily, beautifully, said, "Breathe." Daenerys looked out at faces that knew the price of spectacle and were still willing to pay. She thought of her father and the words he had liked. She thought of her brother and the crown he had received. She thought of Missandei's neck and of Regal's wing and of the bells and of all the small hands that had learned that bread would appear if they stood in this square under this sun. She said, "I will not turn her into a story with a red ending." They sentenced Cersei to exile, not east but west. Put her on a ship with a sail and a rudder and enough food and water to make land if land existed. It was a cruelty decorated as a mercy. It was a mercy bracketed around a cruelty. She laughed when the sentence was read and did not stop. Tyrion walked with her to the dock. He had no wise thing left. Wise things are a resource like trees. He said only, "Goodbye, sister." She tilted her head. "You tried to save me." "I tried to save us," he said. "I was not good at it." "You were better than most," she said, which was the closest she could come. She boarded without looking back. The ship's ropes went slack. The river took her with the patience rivers have learned by living with stones. People watched until watching became an effort and then went to buy onions because stew was planned. In the golden, ugly hour when the city will do anything to persuade the light to stay, Daenerys and Jon walked through the rebuilt streets without escort, with only the dragon's shadow sometimes sliding like a cloud. No one stopped them. A girl with braids like ropes practiced throwing a loop at a post and glowered when she missed. Daenerys lifted the rope and showed her the trick with the wrist that made it turn into a circle instead of a question. An old man carving whistles from willow offered one and refused coin. Jon took it and later failed to make it sound like anything but a frightened bird. Daenerys laughed and let him see her teeth. They went to the hill where a garden had begun where a gallows had been. Volunteers had pulled down the beams with a satisfaction that had made their eyes bright and muddy. Seedlings stood like a sentence that might turn into a poem if given time. Daenerys crouched and freed one from a rock. Jon watched with a fondness that had become a practice and a choice. When she straightened, there was soil under her nails. It looked right. "I think of the wheel," she said. "I think of how proud I was of the words, how clean they sounded in my mouth. I think of how much they would have forgiven me if I had burned the city and stood there with hot iron dripping from my lips. It is not fair that words like mercy and law take more from the tongue and give less to the ear. You chose the harder story," he said. "No bard will sing it. The ones who live it will be hungry and tired and cross with their children at supper and wake up to realize they're old and that no one put their names in a book. And still, it will have been the right one." "Will you leave me?" she asked, not as a queen, not as a woman, but as someone who has placed a weight on a table and wonders if the table was well made. "I was sent back once," he said, "from the place where men do not return. It made me think I was made for endings. It took me until now to learn I might be useful at not ending things." He looked out over the roofs where laundry tried to turn itself into flags. "I mean to stay, as long as I'm welcome, and longer if I'm needed." "You are both," she said. He hesitated. "The truth about me, about my name. It is a tool for other men to pick up when they want to build a chair without learning how," she said. "I have no need of it. Does the North?" "Sansa knows," he said. "She treats it like the weather, kept an eye on, accommodated. She won't tell it as a story to be swallowed whole." If it comes out, it will be because a day came when it was useful to tell the truth. We will meet that day as we met the bells, Daenerys said, with a choice, not a reflex. The first new harvest after the bells did not make anyone cry. It made them swear less. Bread weighed the right amount. Beer was bad and then passable and then sometimes good. The city began to put on weight in the places where cities carry their health. The corners of mouths, the backs of knees, the laughter that comes out without first looking left and right. Ships came with banners that had slept folded for years. From Bravos, a delegation of men who smelled of salt and debt with smiles like Abysai. From Volantis, a priest who thought he had seen the shape of flame on the night of the bells and wanted to tell the queen that she herself was a candle. She told him she was a woman. He bowed and burned incense anyway. From the Summer Isles, song and wood carvings that turned hands tender just to touch them. From Noth, a letter written by Aya that said simply, "The butterflies are unafraid of shadows." Grey Worm returned with men who had learned to walk without marching. Some stayed in the city, some did not. He had new lines on his face where laughter had tried on a home. He reported in the 3 words he allowed himself for anything that touched his heart. "It is possible." Daenerys clasped his forearm. He clasped hers. They let go at the same time. Not all loved her. Not all would. Some waited for her to fail because their proof of the world's cruelty required it. A man in a tavern called her a slaver of a new kind and was thrown out by 3 patrons who had never met a queen and did not care to start. He sat in the street and examined his scraped palms and decided to drink water for a day. A woman complained loudly that the queen's tax collectors had no sense of humor. The collectors agreed and arranged payment by installments and a recipe for useful insults that would keep the soul supple. The faith sent fewer sermons, more bread. The streets learned a new refrain for children's games that included both dragon and wolf and a rule about fairness that made older boys scoff and then obey. On a night like a bowl of velvet, Arya climbed the red keep to a place where most men had agreed the stones did not exist. Jon followed her because he had learned in younger days to go after ghosts and because he did not like the idea of her being alone on the roof. They sat with their legs over the drop and passed a skin between them. "Are you staying?" he asked. "Not past the next moon," she said. "I've got a map in my head with a hole at the edge. It scratches. I'll go west." "You'll fall off," he said, deadpan. "I'll learn to fly," she returned and nudged his shoulder. "Come with me. I'm already falling," he said, glancing at the window where a woman's silhouette sometimes moved before a candle was pinched out. He didn't blush often. He did then. Arya laughed softly. "Finally," she said. "A story where you get to be ridiculous. Take a ship with a good captain," he said. "Take men who don't talk much." "I'll take Ghost," she said, and the word landed between them with a weight that made both look away, each to hide the sudden wet in the eye the wind had nothing to do with. "Not really. He hates boats. If you find something," he said. "Right? If I find nothing," she said, "I will write that too. Most maps are made of that." When she left, she did it early and without farewell said in places where echo can catch it. She slipped along the river like a knife. The ship's stern made a small, confusing ripple. Sansa watched from the balcony with a shawl around her shoulders and said nothing because sisters do not always put words on the ending of a presence. Sometimes they simply feel the space it leaves and put a chair there and use it. The day Daenerys opened the granary for the 4th time in a year and found it full enough to close again with ease. She stood inside while dust motes made slow planets around her and lifted both hands and laughed. The sound brought the steward running because he had learned that sometimes queens laugh when the world is breaking and sometimes queens laugh when the world is mended, and both require paper. She signed the paper that made bread cheaper by a sliver. She signed the paper that forgave the baker's debt if he taught 3 boys who'd been caught stealing to knead instead of pilfer. She signed the paper that sent seed north because there had been a late frost in the neck and men do not eat paper. There were nights when she woke with fire in her mouth and the taste of ash where a tongue should be. On those nights, she went to Drogon and put her forehead to his and breathed until their breaths learned to be the same length. Sometimes Jon found her there, Sometimes he didn't. When he did not speak. He sat with his back to the dragon's warm flank and watched the moon play the old trick where it looks nearer than it is. In the morning, they went back to the work with the sleep they had, not the sleep they lacked. Years did not pass. Not yet. But months did. And in those months, a city learned that bells can mean bread and that dragons can cast shadows that are shade. Men who had learned the cunning of surviving learned the slower, less glamorous art of living. A child in Flea Bottom grew tall enough to reach a door latch and opened it and found, behind it, a room where his mother slept without fear. A woman in silk found that silk was drafty in the wrong places and bought wool and liked it better. A sellsword found that he could put down roots if paid in coin that did not come with an oath to slit a throat in the dark. A priest found that quiet prayer over a pot of stew fed more souls than loud prayer over a crowd with empty bowls. On the day the last of the scorpions was melted into a plowshare before a crowd that counted each hammer blow as if it were a heartbeat, Daenerys held the handle while a blacksmith struck, and the spark that landed on her wrist bit and made a arc that would take a week to fade. She smiled at the pain and did not shake the hand. Jon stood behind her and felt, absurdly, as if they had been married to the city in some old northern rite where fire and iron witnessed a vow. He kept this thought to himself. He was a careful man. He was a happy one, sometimes, which had once seemed impossible and was now a habit he practiced without admitting it aloud. There were new banners at the Mummers' Ford, and none of them had a lion. There were fields outside the city where boys in neat lines learned to be soldiers from men who no longer believed that neatness and death were synonyms. There were birds nesting in the eaves of a rebuilt sept where the sermons were short and practical and included instructions on boiling water for infants. There was a room in the Red Keep where a table had appeared, not of black stone cut to the shape of the world, but of oak cut to the shape of a supper with enough chairs. Around it, at twilight, the queen in her hand and the dwarf who was not a hand and the smuggler who still smelled of onions and the unsullied who had learned the word friend and the smith who had learned the word lord and the lady who had learned the word ally sat and ate and argued and laughed and did not always win the day but did not, any longer, lose the night. Once, a raven came from beyond the wall with letters frozen hard to its leg. Tormund had scrawled that the snows were the old snows again, and that the dead did not walk, and that a bear had stolen his boot and his heart only a little bit. He invited Jon to visit, wrote that the air up there cleaned a man the way a hard laugh does. Jon read it and smiled and put the letter in a box with 3 other things. A lock of Ghost's winter fur, a scrap of cloth that had been part of Arya's glove, and a coin Davos had fumbled once and sworn at and then kept for luck until the day he needed luck more than he needed the coin. He closed the box and returned to the ledger, because letters are an ocean and ledgers are a shore. Summer came properly. The dragon slept more. The queen not at all. She began to speak of schools without calling them that, of a place where girls could learn accounts and boys could learn to read the shape of a contract like a field. She talked of a law that said no one could be made to take a loan that their grandchildren could not pay, and of another that said words like lord and sire did not count for as much in a court as words like did and did not. She suggested to Tyrion that a tax on wine might pay for clean wells. He suggested that a tax on clean wells might make wine cheaper as men drank water. They compromised on a fee on imported cups with gilt rims that no one needed and everyone wanted. They bought pipes. On a night when the air moved like silk and the lanterns made small suns in the courtyards, Jon took the whistle from his shelf, the willow one the old man had carved, and brought it to his mouth and finally, at last, made it sing. It wasn't a pretty sound. It was thin and insistent, like a child asking a fair question. Daenerys heard it from the next room and came and stood in the doorway and rested her shoulder on the frame and listened until he lowered it. Sheepish. "I knew you would," she said. "Why?" he asked. "You kept trying," she said. "I have learned that there are 2 kinds of magic. The kind that makes fire from nothing and the kind that turns practice into music. The first makes men cheer. The second makes them live." He set the whistle down and crossed to her and put his forehead to hers, just as she had done to Drogon by habit on nights when the wind tasted of ash. In the next room, papers lay signed that would send grain north and glass east and 3 scholars to the Stormlands to teach a boy who had a hammer to also have a book. Somewhere far above, the dragon rolled over on his ledge and dreamt of a sky without arrows. Somewhere far below, in a cell now empty, a spider that had found itself lucky enough to live in the capital of men crawled along a wall that remembered vows. The bells rang. It was an hour men had begun to recognize. Supper. They went down to the table that fit them and sat. Outside, King's Landing breathed, for once, like a creature that had found a pace it could keep. The sea lifted and laid itself down. The wind went to see which door a story would choose next. And the wheel, which had not been shattered in a blaze, found itself cannibalized piece by piece to make scaffolds and stools, and the rims of barrels and children's toys that rolled and made laughter where iron once made law.